The town was not large, but it was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know something about everyone else. People knew who baked the best bread, who fixed old bicycles, who sang in the church choir, and which children were expected to do something great one day. News traveled quickly there. A good grade in school, a new job, a family celebration, even a small mistake. Nothing stayed private for long. In one small house near the edge of that town lived a quiet teenage girl who was rarely part of those conversations. People had seen her many times. They saw her walking to school with books held close to her chest. They saw her standing in line at the bakery with her eyes lowered. They saw her helping an older neighbor carry grocery bags across the street. But even though many people had seen her, very few people felt like they truly knew her. She was the kind of person who spoke softly, smiled politely, and stepped aside when others wanted attention. In classrooms, she always chose the seat near the window or the back corner. During group activities, she listened more than she talked. If someone asked her a question, she answered kindly, but never with more words than needed. Some people thought she was nervous. Some thought she lacked confidence. Some simply forgot she was even there. But none of them knew what her evenings looked like. None of them knew what happened after the streets became quiet, after the dinner dishes were cleaned, and after most lights in the neighborhood had gone dark. Inside her home, there was an old upright piano placed against a faded wall. Time had left its marks on it. Some keys were slightly yellow. A few made softer sounds than the others. The wood had scratches that told stories no one remembered anymore. To most people, it looked like an old piece of furniture. To her, it felt alive. Every night, after her responsibilities were finished, she would sit in front of that piano and place her hands gently above the keys. Sometimes she stayed there for several seconds before playing a single note, almost like she was greeting an old friend. And then the music would begin. Soft at first, careful, almost shy. But as the minutes passed, something changed. The quiet girl who barely spoke during the day disappeared. In her place was someone strong, someone fearless, someone who had stories to tell. Her fingers moved with confidence that no one at school had ever seen. Her eyes stayed focused. Her breathing slowed. The world outside faded away. Music was the only place where she never felt invisible. Years earlier, when she was still very young, her grandmother had placed her tiny hands on those same keys and told her something she never forgot. When words become too heavy, let music carry them. At that age, she had not fully understood those words. But life had a way of teaching people things slowly. And over time, she understood exactly what they meant. Her family did not have much money. They lived simply. Clothes were worn carefully and repaired instead of replaced. School supplies were used until every page was filled. Nothing in the house was wasted. But somehow, no matter how difficult things became, the piano remained. When bills became hard to pay, other things were sold. Old furniture, and used kitchen items, decorations, but never the piano. It stayed, and so did her promise to keep playing. At school, however, music was not something anyone connected with her. The school had talented students who performed often. Some sang loudly in talent shows. Some played instruments in front of crowds without fear. Some posted videos online and received hundreds of comments. She watched quietly from the audience. She clapped. She smiled. And then she went home. No one ever asked if she played anything. And she never told them. One cold morning, everything began to change. The school hallways were louder than usual. Students were gathered near the main notice board, whispering, pointing, laughing, and taking pictures with their phones. She walked closer, holding her books tightly as always. A large poster had been placed in the center. It announced a regional music competition. The event would bring students from different schools across the area. Professional judges would attend. Scholarships would be offered. Winners would perform on a large public stage. Excitement filled the hallway. Students began talking over one another. "I'm definitely signing up. This is my chance. The judges are famous. The whole town will be there." She stood quietly near the back, reading every word. Her heart began beating faster. She read the poster once, then again, Then one more time. Her fingers tightened around her books. A small voice inside her whispered something dangerous. What if? She quickly looked away. No. People like her did not walk onto big stages. People like her sat in the audience. They watched. They clapped. They went home. That was safer. That was familiar. But the thought refused to leave. Throughout the day, while teachers spoke and classmates laughed, her mind kept returning to that poster. By the time she walked home, the sky had turned soft gray, and a cool wind moved through the trees. She entered the house quietly, placed her books on the table, helped prepare dinner, washed dishes, and completed her homework. She followed the same routine she followed every day. But something inside her felt different. That night, when she sat in front of the piano, her hands trembled slightly. She looked at the keys. She remembered the poster. She remembered the stage. She remembered the word competition. And for the first time in years, fear entered the room before the music did. She placed her hands in her lap. For several seconds, she did nothing. Then a voice came softly from behind her. Why did you stop? She turned. An older family member stood in the doorway, holding a warm cup in both hands. There was kindness in those tired eyes. The kind of kindness that noticed things other people missed. You always play, the voice said. The quiet girl looked down. There's a competition at school. The words came out so softly they almost disappeared. And, she hesitated. People like me don't belong on stages like that. For a moment, the room became completely still. Then a gentle smile appeared. Who told you that? She opened her mouth. But no words came. Because the truth was, no one had ever said it directly. She had simply believed it. For years. Without question. The older figure stepped closer and placed the warm cup beside the piano. The world is full of loud people, came the quiet reply. That doesn't mean quiet people have nothing worth hearing. The words stayed in the air. Heavy. Real. She looked back at the piano, then slowly raised her hands. And this time, when her fingers touched the keys, the sound that filled the room was different. It wasn't careful. It wasn't shy. It wasn't hiding. For the next 2 hours, the old piano carried every fear, every doubt, every dream she had kept hidden for years. And somewhere between the first note and the last, a decision was made. The next morning, while the hallways filled with noise once again, she walked toward the sign-up table. Her steps were small. Her hands were cold. Her heartbeat felt louder than the crowd around her. Several students looked at her with confusion. Some whispered. Some smiled in surprise. But she kept walking. When the registration form was placed in front of her, she stared at the blank line for several seconds. Then, with slightly shaking fingers, she wrote her name. And in that single quiet moment, everything began to change. The moment her name touched that registration paper, it felt like the world around her changed. Even though everything outside looked exactly the same. The hallway was still crowded. Students were still laughing, talking loudly, and moving from one classroom to another. Lockers still opened and closed with sharp metal sounds. Teachers still walked past carrying books and papers. But inside her, something was different. For the first time in her life, she had done something before fear could stop her. She stood there for a second longer, staring at her own handwriting on the paper. Her name looked almost unfamiliar in that place, surrounded by names of students everyone already knew. Students who performed every year. Students who had music teachers, expensive instruments, stage experience, and confidence that seemed natural. Her name looked small among them, quiet, almost out of place. She picked up her books and turned away before anyone could say anything. But it was already too late. People had noticed. By lunchtime, whispers had started. She heard them while standing near the window with her lunch tray. Did you see the list? She signed up. For piano? I didn't even know she played. Are you serious? Maybe it's a joke. She kept her eyes on her food and said nothing. She had spent years becoming invisible. Now suddenly people were looking, and somehow that felt harder than being ignored. She took a quiet seat in the corner, away from the noise, and tried to focus on eating. But every laugh sounded louder than usual. Every whisper felt personal even when it probably wasn't. She reminded herself why she signed up. She reminded herself of the old piano. She reminded herself of the words spoken the night before. Quiet people have something worth hearing. She repeated those words in her mind until the bell rang. That afternoon, a music teacher stopped her in the hallway. The teacher was known for being strict but fair. Students respected that serious voice and careful eyes. "I saw your name on the list," the teacher said. Her heartbeat jumped. She nodded. "How long have you been playing?" She looked down for a moment. "A few years." The teacher raised an eyebrow. "At school?" She shook her head. "At home." The teacher studied her face for a moment, almost trying to read something hidden there. Then came a simple answer. "Good." That was all. No laughter, no doubt, no surprise, just one word. Good. For some reason, that single word stayed with her for the rest of the day. When school ended, she walked home as usual, but her thoughts moved faster than her steps. What if she failed? What if everyone was right? What if she froze on stage? What if her hands stopped moving? What if the music inside her sounded different once people were watching? The questions followed her all the way home. That evening, the house felt quieter than usual. She finished her chores, completed her homework, and sat in front of the old piano once again. This time, the keys looked different. Not because the piano had changed, because now every note mattered. She took a deep breath and began. The first song felt shaky. Her fingers missed notes she normally never missed. She stopped, closed her eyes, started again, and again, and again. Outside, the sky grew darker. Inside, the room filled with music. Hours passed without her noticing. At some point, the older family member quietly placed a plate of food beside her. She didn't even notice until the music stopped. "You forgot to eat," came the soft reminder. She looked at the untouched plate and smiled. A small smile, a real one. "I'm scared," she admitted. The older figure sat nearby. "That means it matters." She looked back at the keys. "What if I embarrass myself?" The answer came without hesitation. "Then you'll survive." She blinked. "And what if I'm not good enough?" A gentle laugh filled the room. "That question has stopped more dreams than failure ever has." She sat quietly after hearing that. The words stayed with her, long after the conversation ended. The next few days passed faster than usual. The competition date grew closer. Practice sessions were scheduled at school for registered performers. That meant, for the first time, she would play in front of others. Not a crowd, not judges, but still people. When the practice day arrived, her stomach felt tight from the moment she woke up. She barely touched breakfast. Her books felt heavier than usual. Even the walk to school felt longer. By the time she reached the music room, several students were already there. Some were warming up their voices. Some tuned instruments. Some laughed confidently. Some talked about previous competitions and trophies. She quietly walked to the far corner and waited. No one spoke to her. A few students looked, then looked away. One by one, performers took turns. Strong voices filled the room. Fast fingers moved across instruments. Confident smiles appeared after every performance. Applause followed. Then her name was called. Her entire body went still. For a moment, she wondered if pretending not to hear would be easier. But the teacher called her name again. Every eye turned. Her legs felt heavy as she walked toward the piano. She could hear whispers. She could feel people watching. She sat down carefully, placed her hands above the keys, and froze. The room felt too quiet. Her breathing became shallow. Her fingers felt cold. Her mind suddenly became empty. No music. No rhythm. Nothing. Just silence. A few students shifted in their seats. Someone cleared their throat. She could feel panic rising. Then, she remembered something. Not words. Not advice. A memory. A younger version of herself sitting beside the same old piano. Tiny hands. Missed notes. Laughter. Practice. Patience. Love. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. She stopped looking at the audience, stopped thinking about the room, stopped thinking about mistakes, and simply looked at the keys. Then, she played. The first note was soft. So soft some people leaned forward to hear it. Then came another, and another. Within seconds, the room changed. The whispers stopped. The movement stopped. Even the students who had looked bored began paying attention. Her fingers moved naturally now. Not perfectly. Not like a machine. Like a person. Like someone telling the truth. The melody carried warmth, memory, pain, hope, and something impossible to explain. When she reached the final note, the room stayed silent for 2 full seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then quietly, someone clapped. Then another. Then the entire room. She looked up slowly. Faces that once looked doubtful now looked confused. Surprised. Curious. Even impressed. The strict teacher gave a slow nod. Nothing more. But that nod meant everything. As she walked back to her seat, something inside her felt lighter. Not because fear had disappeared, but because she had played while afraid. And somehow, that felt stronger. But what she didn't know was that someone standing quietly near the doorway had recorded the entire practice. And by the next morning, her quiet secret would no longer belong only to her. The next morning felt different before she even opened her eyes. There was no clear reason for it. The room looked the same. The sunlight coming through the curtains looked the same. The quiet sounds from the kitchen were the same as every other school day. But something in the air felt unfamiliar. She sat up slowly, rubbed the sleep from her eyes, and reached for her school bag. Her mind was still thinking about the practice session from the day before. The piano, the silence in the room, the unexpected applause, the teacher's quiet nod. A part of her still wondered if it had all happened. Maybe people would forget about it. Maybe today everything would return to normal. Maybe she could go back to being invisible. That thought followed her all the way to school. But the moment she stepped through the front gates, she knew nothing was normal anymore. People were looking at her. Not just one or two, dozens. Some whispered. Some smiled. Some stared openly. Others quickly looked away when she noticed. Her steps slowed. Her fingers tightened around her books. She tried not to panic. She kept walking. But the hallway that once ignored her now seemed filled with eyes. She passed a group of students standing near the lockers. That's her. I told you it was real. Did you watch the video? I watched it 3 times. Her heartbeat jumped. Video? She kept walking, pretending not to hear. But inside, questions were rushing through her mind. What video? Who recorded it? How many people had seen it? By the time she reached her classroom, her hands were cold. She quietly sat in her usual seat near the window. She pulled out her books, tried to focus, tried to breathe. Then a student sitting nearby leaned over. You're famous now. The words were said with a smile. Not cruel. Not mocking. Just surprised. She looked confused. The student turned a phone screen toward her. And there it was. A video. Her video. The practice performance. She watched herself sitting at the piano. She watched her hands begin to move. She watched the room slowly fall silent. The video had already been shared across student groups, school pages, and private chats. Thousands of views. Hundreds of comments. She stared at the screen, unable to speak. Her first feeling was fear. A deep, sudden fear. She had spent years avoiding attention. Now attention had found her without permission. Are you okay? The student asked. She nodded, even though she wasn't sure. Classes passed slowly that day. Teachers spoke. Students answered questions. Pens moved across paper. But her mind stayed somewhere else. Every time someone looked at her, she noticed. Every whisper felt louder. Every laugh made her wonder if it was about her. By lunch, the video had spread even further. Students from other classes now recognized her. Some smiled. Some waved. Some simply stared. She carried her lunch tray to her usual corner. But before she could sit down, someone stopped her. It was one of the school's most confident performers. A student known for winning competitions. Someone everyone respected. For a second, she prepared herself for criticism, or doubt, or another uncomfortable question. Instead, the student smiled. "You were incredible." She blinked. "I mean it." She didn't know what to say, so she simply whispered, "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but for someone who usually avoided conversation, it felt like climbing a mountain. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. She was called to the music room. Her stomach tightened immediately. Had she broken a rule? Was recording not allowed? Was she in trouble? She walked there slowly, her thoughts moving faster than her feet. When she entered, the music teacher was standing beside the piano, arms folded, expression serious as always. "Close the door," the teacher said. She obeyed. The room became quiet. Then the teacher looked directly at her. "How long have you been hiding this?" She looked down. "I wasn't hiding." The teacher waited. She corrected herself. "Maybe I was." The teacher gave a small smile. Rare. Almost impossible to notice. "Sit." She sat at the piano. "Play. Now. Now." No audience. No students. No phones. Just the 2 of them. She took a breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and played. This time there was no fear, no pressure, no need to impress anyone. Just music. When she finished, the teacher remained silent for several seconds. Then came words she never expected to hear. "You're not entering that competition to participate." Her heart stopped. Had she done something wrong? Then the teacher finished. "You're entering to win." She stared, speechless. The teacher walked closer. "Talent matters, but honesty matters more. And when you play, people believe every note." Those words stayed with her long after she left the room. But not everyone was happy. By the end of the day, not all whispers sounded kind. Some students were supportive. Some were curious. But others were uncomfortable. Because someone unexpected had appeared. Someone no one had noticed. And suddenly, that someone mattered. She heard comments in passing. "One video doesn't mean anything. Let's see how she performs on the real stage. Practice is easy. Judges won't be impressed by emotion." She heard every word. And for a moment old doubts returned. What if they were right? What if the video was luck? What if real pressure changed everything? That evening, she sat at the piano but didn't play. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. Her reflection stared back from the polished wood. She looked tired, uncertain, human. The older family member entered quietly. "Bad day." She nodded. "Good." She looked confused. "Good." A gentle smile appeared. "Because now the real work begins." She stayed silent. The older figure sat beside her. When nobody notices you, dreaming feels safe. A pause. When people start watching, that's when courage gets tested. She looked at the keys again, then slowly lifted her hands. This time, she didn't play the song from practice. She played something new, something deeper, something harder, something that demanded everything. The melody filled the room, stronger, bolder, more honest than ever. Hours passed. Night became deeper. The town grew quiet. Lights turned off one by one. But in that small house near the edge of town, the old piano refused to sleep. And neither did the girl. Because in just a few days, she would no longer be performing in front of classmates. She would be standing under real stage lights, in front of judges, in front of strangers, in front of an audience that expected greatness. And for the first time in her life, she was beginning to believe she might actually belong there. The morning of the competition arrived faster than she expected. For days, she had counted every sunrise, every practice session, every quiet hour spent in front of the old piano. She had told herself she would be ready when this day came. But as soon as she opened her eyes, she knew something no amount of practice could completely remove. Fear. It sat quietly in her chest. Not loud, not wild, just there, steady, real. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, staring at the floor while the early morning light touched the walls of her room. Today was no longer something waiting in the future. Today was here. Outside, birds sang as if it were any normal morning. Inside, her heartbeat said otherwise. She got dressed carefully. Nothing expensive. Nothing designed to impress. Simple clothes. Clean shoes. Neatly prepared. She tied her hair back, looked at herself in the mirror, and almost didn't recognize the person looking back. Not because her face had changed, but because something behind her eyes had. There was still nervousness, still doubt, still questions. But there was something else now. Strength. Quiet strength. The kind people often missed. She walked into the kitchen where breakfast was waiting. The older family member looked up and smiled. Big day. She nodded. Scared. She thought for a second, then smiled softly. Very. The answer brought a gentle laugh. Good. It means your heart is awake. She sat down, trying to eat, though every bite felt difficult. Her mind was already at the stage. The piano, the judges, the audience, the lights, the silence before the first note. She barely finished half her meal. When it was time to leave, the older figure stopped her near the door. One thing. She turned. Don't play to impress people. A pause. Play so people remember how being human feels. Those words followed her all the way to the competition hall. The building was larger than any place she had ever performed. Cars filled the parking area. Students carrying instruments moved in every direction. Families gathered near the entrance. Teachers walked quickly with clipboards. Volunteers directed people toward registration tables. The entire place buzzed with excitement. And standing there, holding her bag tightly, she suddenly felt smaller than ever. For one brief moment, she thought about turning around, about going home, about pretending she never signed up. No one would force her. No one would chase her. She could disappear, just like before. Her feet stopped moving. Her breathing became shallow. Her fingers felt cold. Then her phone vibrated. A message. Only 4 words. You already belong here. No name. No explanation. Just those words. She stared at the screen, then slowly took a deep breath, and kept walking. Inside, the waiting area was full of performers. Some practiced quietly. Some stretched their fingers. Some whispered with teachers. Some stared at sheet music. Others looked completely calm. She wondered how that was possible. Did they not feel fear? Did their hearts not race? Did their hands never shake? She found an empty chair in the corner and sat quietly. Her piano piece lived in her mind now. Every note, every pause, every emotion. She didn't need paper. She didn't need reminders. She had lived with this music for years. A volunteer entered with a clipboard. Names were called. Performers disappeared behind stage curtains one by one. Applause occasionally echoed from the hall. Sometimes loud, sometimes polite, sometimes explosive. Each sound made her heartbeat faster. She listened carefully, trying not to compare, trying not to imagine failure, trying not to let fear grow. Then a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. The music teacher. Walk with me. She stood. Together they walked toward the side stage. The hallway felt strangely quiet compared to the crowd outside. Only footsteps, only breathing, only nerves. Before reaching the curtain, the teacher stopped, looked directly at her. Listen carefully. She nodded. You are not here because of a viral video. A pause. You are not here because people are curious. Another pause. You are here because when you touch those keys, people stop pretending not to feel things. Her eyes widened. The teacher placed a hand on her shoulder. Now go remind them. Then the teacher walked away. She stood there alone, just a few steps away from the stage. She could hear the current performer finishing. Applause filled the hall. Then came the announcer's voice. Then, her name. Everything inside her went silent. Not the room. Not the crowd. Her. Like time had paused. She walked forward. Step, step, step. The stage lights hit her eyes. Bright, warm, almost blinding. For a second, she could barely see anything. Then shapes became clearer. Rows of people. Hundreds of faces. Judges seated in front. Clipboards. Pens. Expressions impossible to read. She heard whispers. That's the girl from the video. She's younger than I expected. Can she really do it again? She heard everything. And somehow, this time, it didn't break her. She reached the piano. A beautiful grand piano. Shiny. Perfect. Nothing like the old one at home. She touched it gently, almost like greeting a stranger. Then sat down. Adjusted her posture. Placed her feet carefully. Lifted her hands. And froze. Not from fear. From memory. She suddenly saw the old piano. The worn keys. The faded wood. The late nights. The missed notes. The quiet tears. The small victories. The voices that doubted. The voices that believed. The long road that brought her here. And in that single moment, she understood something. This stage wasn't where her story began. It was simply where others would finally hear it. She closed her eyes, took one deep breath, opened them, and touched the first key. The first note floated into the hall like a whisper. Soft, gentle, honest. The audience leaned forward. The judges looked up. Pens stopped moving. The second note came. Then the third. Then the melody began to grow. Stronger, deeper, wider, like a story unfolding. Like memories becoming sound. Like truth finally finding its voice. And within less than 30 seconds, something incredible happened. The entire hall became completely silent. Not polite silence. Not waiting silence. Real silence. The kind that only appears when people forget everything else around them. And as her fingers continued moving across those keys, even the judges stopped writing and simply listened. The hall remained silent, not because people were being polite, not because they were waiting for something bigger, not because they were unsure what was happening. It was silent because nobody wanted to break the moment. Her fingers continued moving across the keys, and with every note, the distance between her and the audience seemed to disappear. She had walked onto that stage carrying fear, but now fear was nowhere to be found. Now there was only music, and truth, and something far deeper than performance. The melody grew stronger. What began like a whisper was slowly becoming a story. A story without words. A story everyone somehow understood. Even if they had never met her. Even if they knew nothing about her life. Even if they had only come to watch a competition. Somewhere in the second row, an older woman slowly lowered her phone. She had started recording, but now she simply listened. A young boy sitting beside his family leaned forward in his chair, eyes wide. A teacher near the back stopped taking notes. A volunteer standing by the side curtain forgot to move. Even people who knew nothing about music suddenly cared about every note. Because this no longer felt like a contest. It felt personal. The judges sat completely still. The pens in their hands hadn't moved in minutes. One judge rested both hands on the table. Another slowly removed reading glasses. A third leaned forward slightly, eyes never leaving the stage. They had heard technical perfection before. They had heard speed. They had heard difficult pieces. They had heard years of expensive training. But what they were hearing now was something harder to teach. Something impossible to fake. Honesty. Her hands moved with growing confidence. Not every note was perfect. A few keys were touched softer than planned. A few pauses lasted slightly longer. But somehow, that made it even stronger. Because it sounded human. Because it sounded real. Because it sounded alive. As she played, memories began moving through her mind like quiet pictures. The old piano at home. The faded wall behind it. Winter nights with cold fingers. Summer evenings with open windows. Homework waiting unfinished. Sleepy eyes. Missed notes. Starting over. Starting over again. And again. She remembered the first time her fingers could barely reach an octave. She remembered laughing after hitting the wrong notes. She remembered frustration. She remembered tears no one saw. She remembered wanting to quit. More than once. She remembered hearing other students talk about private lessons and professional teachers. She remembered pretending it didn't matter. She remembered wondering if talent was enough when money wasn't. She remembered doubting herself. She remembered silence. And now, that silence had become her strength. Her left hand moved lower. The sound deepened. The melody shifted. What had once felt warm now carried pain. Not dramatic pain. Not loud pain. Real pain. The kind people carry quietly. The kind hidden behind smiles. The kind most people never talk about. And suddenly, the audience felt it. One woman in the third row quietly wiped her eyes. A man sitting beside her swallowed hard and looked away for a moment. Even younger students, who normally struggled to sit still, remained completely focused. No phones. No whispers. No movement. Only listening. Backstage, other performers stood shoulder to shoulder near the curtain. Some who had doubted her. Some who had whispered. Some who had laughed. Now none of them spoke. They simply watched. One of them slowly shook their head in disbelief. Not out of jealousy. Out of respect. Her music continued to build. Faster now. Bolder. The notes moved like waves. Rising. Falling. Climbing. Breaking. Returning. Her fingers no longer looked nervous. They looked free. For the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to stay unnoticed. She wasn't trying to avoid judgment. She wasn't trying to fit into anyone's expectations. She wasn't asking permission. She was simply being exactly who she had always been. And somehow, that was more powerful than perfection. Near the front row, her music teacher sat quietly with folded arms. No smile. No visible emotion. Just focused eyes. But anyone looking closely would have noticed something unusual. Pride. Real pride. The kind that doesn't need words. Farther back in the audience, the older family member sat quietly with hands folded in their lap. Eyes shining. Not from stage lights. From memories. From years. From sacrifice. From believing before anyone else did. The melody shifted again. Now softer. Slower. Almost fragile. The kind of music that makes people stop thinking and start remembering. Some thought about childhood. Some thought about lost friends. Some thought about family. Some thought about dreams they once had but forgot. Nobody heard exactly the same story. But somehow, everyone heard something meant for them. That was her gift. And she didn't even fully realize it. Her eyes remained on the keys. Her breathing steady. Her shoulders relaxed. Her movements calm. Like she had finally reached the place she was always meant to be. Then came the hardest section. The part that demanded everything. Speed. Control. Emotion. Precision. One mistake here could break the entire performance. One moment of doubt could change everything. The hall felt even quieter. If silence had a sound, it would have sounded like that moment. Her fingers hovered for half a second. Then moved. Fast. Clean. Confident. The notes flew across the hall like sparks. Light. Fire. Energy. Life. Her hands crossed. Returned. Climbed. Dropped. Rose again. Every movement carried years of hidden practice. Every second carried discipline no one had seen. Every note answered every whisper. Every doubt. Every quiet laugh. Every moment she thought she wasn't enough. And then, she reached the final section. The room somehow grew even stiller. The judges looked almost frozen. The audience barely breathed. Backstage, nobody moved. She took one slow breath and played the final melody. Not loud, not dramatic, not designed to impress. Just honest, beautifully honest. Her fingers slowed. The music softened. The final notes floated through the hall like fading light. One note, then another, then one last quiet chord. And suddenly, it was over. Her hands remained on the keys. Her breathing stayed steady. She didn't look up. Not yet. Because for one long, impossible moment, nobody made a sound. Not a clap. Not a whisper. Not a movement. Nothing. And in that breathtaking silence, she began to wonder, had she moved them, or had she failed so completely that no one even knew what to say? Her hands remained resting gently on the piano keys. The final chord had already faded. The music was gone. but the feeling it left behind still filled every corner of the hall. She sat completely still. Her breathing was calm on the outside. Inside, her heart was moving faster than ever. She kept her eyes on the piano. She didn't dare look up. Not yet. The silence felt endless. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Felt much longer. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. Did I forget something? Did I make too many mistakes? Was it too simple? Too emotional? Too quiet? Did they expect something bigger? Her fingers slowly pulled away from the keys. Still no sound. The silence became heavier, harder, almost impossible to breathe through. For a brief moment, old fears returned. The same fears that had followed her for years. Maybe people were right. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe one video had changed nothing. Maybe she never truly belonged on a stage this big. Then, a sound. One clap. Sharp, clear, strong. She looked up. One of the judges was standing. Hands moving slowly. Eyes locked on the stage. Then another judge stood. And another. Then the entire front row rose to their feet. And suddenly, the hall exploded. Applause filled the room like thunder. Louder than anything she had ever heard. People stood. People smiled. People shouted. Some wiped tears. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Some clapped so hard their hands turned red. The sound surrounded her from every direction. And for a moment, she couldn't move. She simply stared. Not because she wanted attention. Not because she expected praise. But because for the first time in her life, she realized people weren't just seeing her. They were hearing her. Really hearing her. She slowly stood from the piano bench. Her legs felt weak. Her hands trembled. Her eyes searched the crowd. And then she saw them. Near the back. The older family member. Standing. Clapping. Smiling through tears. No words. None were needed. That single look said everything. I knew. I always knew. Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard. And bowed. The applause somehow grew louder. Backstage, other performers were clapping too. Some smiling. Some stunned. Some looking at her as if they were seeing her for the first time. Because, in truth, they were. A volunteer gently guided her off stage. The moment she stepped behind the curtain, her knees almost gave out. Not from weakness. From emotion. From pressure finally leaving her body. She placed one hand against the wall and took a slow breath. Then another. And another. Footsteps approached. Her music teacher. Still serious. Still calm. Still impossible to read. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then the teacher gave one small nod. I told you. That was all. But somehow, those 3 words meant more than any speech. She smiled. A real smile. Not shy. Not careful. Just honest. Other performers began coming closer. One after another. Some shook her hand. Some congratulated her. Some admitted they hadn't expected that. And surprisingly, she didn't feel awkward. She didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She simply felt present. For the next hour, performances continued. But her mind stayed somewhere between the stage and the old piano at home. Between the applause and the years of silence that came before it. Eventually, all performers were called back to the stage for the final results. Her heartbeat returned. Not as fear, as anticipation. Students lined up under the lights. Some confident. Some nervous. Some whispering. She stood quietly at the end. Hands folded. Breathing slowly. The announcer stepped forward with an envelope. The crowd became quiet again. 3rd place was announced. Applause. Smiles. Pictures. 2nd place. More applause. More excitement. Then a pause. A long pause. The announcer smiled. And 1st place. Her heartbeat stopped. Goes to. Another pause. Then her name. For half a second, she didn't move. She actually looked around. As if maybe they meant someone else. The crowd began cheering again. The teacher gave another quiet nod. The older family member covered their mouth with shaking hands. And only then, she understood. Her feet moved slowly toward the center of the stage. Every step felt unreal. She accepted the award with trembling hands. Lights flashed. Cameras clicked. People clapped. But strangely, the trophy didn't feel like the most important part. Not even close. Because as she looked out across that crowd, she understood something much bigger. This moment was never about winning. It was never about trophies. Never about videos. Never about attention. Never about proving people wrong. It was about finally proving something to herself. That quiet did not mean weak. That gentle did not mean forgettable. That being unseen did not mean being unworthy. And that sometimes, the people who speak the least carry the most powerful stories. When the event ended and the crowd slowly began leaving, she stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky was turning orange and gold. The world felt strangely peaceful. Cars moved slowly. Families laughed. Voices filled the parking area. But for a moment, she stood completely still, breathing it all in. The older family member walked beside her. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then came one simple question. So what now? She looked up at the evening sky, thought about the old piano, thought about the stage, thought about fear, thought about courage, then smiled. A quiet smile, the same kind she had always worn. But now it carried something new. Belief. Now, she said softly, I keep playing. And somewhere far behind them, inside that empty hall, the last note of her music still seemed to live in the silence.